Everyone. Thank you so much for joining this webinar. My name is Kate, and I'm the Interfaith Coordinator here at Islamic Networks Group. We've been around for 24 years now. We work to break stereotypes against the Muslim American community, and we also have a lot of different interfaith initiatives as well. We have taken on the grassroots efforts of the Know Your Neighbor Multifaith Encounters Coalition, which now includes over 50 interfaith organizations, but was launched in 2015 by Gerwin, who is actually on this call today with us, and has grown to now also include different grassroots efforts instead of only a political voice within the White House, which is what it was started as. So we have launched a series of webinars to talk about different initiatives within the interfaith world and share different resources and best practices with different interfaith organizations. So this webinar today was created after a lot of dialogue about the different hate crimes against the South Asian communities, the Muslim community, the Hindu community, and the Sikh community. And we wanted to work to combat these stereotypes that exist against these different faith traditions. So we wanted to answer questions and give the basics of these faiths. So we are going to share different personal experiences. We're going to talk about the very basic overview of the faith traditions, and we want to answer questions that any of our viewers might have. So we have three different people on this call today. We have Padma, who is the Associate Director of the West Coast Hindu American Foundation, which is a really incredible organization that educates people about Hinduism and also works to combat different stereotypes against the Hindu community. We have Gerwin, who is the Executive Director of the National Sikh Coalition, which has launched an incredible media campaign, by the way, which everybody should check out. The more that I see it, the more I learn about Sikhism, which I think that what they're doing is really incredible. And
WeAreSikhs.org.
And they have a lot of commercials that have been airing on CNN and Fox. You can't turn on CNN without seeing a Sikh commercial. So we also have Ishaq, who is the youth coordinator here at Islamic Networks Group, and my colleague, and works to educate youth on how to talk about Islam and empower them to break different stereotypes within their communities and within their school districts as well. So we are going to have Padma begin, and she's going to talk about Hinduism and talk about herself and the Hindu American Foundation.
Awesome, thank you, Kate. Let me just flip over to our slides here for the presentation part. All right, so again, thanks, Kate. Let me go ahead and give a little bit of a background on myself. As Kate mentioned, my name is Padma Mana. I'm Associate Director for the West Coast here at the Hindu American Foundation, or HAF. We are an advocacy group that does work in issues regarding the Hindu American communities. So we do work in community-related issues such as these webinars, as well as policy and education. You can read more about us at our website listed here. A little bit about me personally. I grew up as a Hindu American in the heart of the American South in the great state of Arkansas. So I really appreciate this Know Your Neighbor series. So again, thanks to Kate and ING, as well as Gerwin and Ishaq for being here to speak today on their respective faiths. I feel like this is a great way to learn more about these religions, especially given the socio-political environment that we live in today, and combating many of the misrepresentations and stereotypes that are out there. So I'll be sharing a little bit on the basics of Hinduism, just including core beliefs, fundamental principles, and a little bit of, I guess, fun stories as well. Hopefully by the end of the webinar, you'll have a better understanding of Hinduism as well as the Hindu community. This Hinduism 101 presentation is part of a larger series that's part of our education portfolio at HAF. So definitely feel free to check out the other materials and information we have available online at our website. This is just a kind of shortened version of a big series of presentations that we have. A little background on Hinduism. It's at least 5,000 years old. It's considered the world's oldest major religion that's still active today. It developed in the Indus Valley, and today there are over 1 billion Hindus practicing worldwide. Making this a little bit more relevant to us, though, there's over 2 million Hindus in North America. Since 1960, there's been a steady migration of Hindu Americans. Some states that have large Hindu populations include California, New York, New Jersey, Texas, There's a few more, but I won't rattle off all of them. But you very likely have a Hindu friend, teacher, coworker, and neighbor. You probably know a Hindu. So I think it's really important to understand their faith and their background and perspective, and a little bit about the way they see the world. Basic premise of Hinduism, this is kind of our vision statement slide. Hinduism offers practitioners a variety of ways to transform their minds so that they become aware of the divine's presence everywhere, at all times, in themselves, in every other human being, and in the whole of creation. So a person aware of the divine's omnipresence rises above sorrows, awakens an innate sense of love, compassion, and service towards all, and spreads peace and joy. So I think basically what all of this is stating is that this sense of divine that we believe in Hinduism permeates the universe and all beings. Hindus believe that the human experience is unique in that we can tune into or become aware of this divine presence. In doing so, we can, again, inculcate this sense of love and compassion and service towards all. We see this in a lot of the Hindu organizations and institutions that are practicing today with social projects and different aspects of this compassion and service. And I think one important thing about this vision statement is that it really establishes the concept of universal acceptance in Hinduism. So pluralism, or seeing all individuals and all paths of different backgrounds as legitimate and acceptable ways to reach this divine, is something that Hindus believe in. This concept of divinity, Brahman, and there's also many different names for it in Hinduism, but I'll just keep coming back to that as we go through this short presentation. Before I expand on it, I wanted to kind of touch on Hindu scriptures. So unlike other religions, there is not a single scripture that defines the entire belief system. The teachings recorded by a number of anonymous sages have been collected into the major body of script called the Vedas. Vedas are sectioned into 4 books. So these are the Rig Veda, Yajur Veda, Sama Veda, and Atharvana Veda. We have something called the Upanishads, which is smaller texts within the Vedas. These can also stand separately. The Vedas and Upanishads together are considered the Shruti, or the major body of text. But then there's also other bodies of scriptures, namely the Smriti, which include Puranas, epics like the Ramayana and Mahabharata, and lots of other texts that aren't listed here. But I think, especially with Ramayana and Bhagavad Gita, which is in the Mahabharata, these are some of the household texts that Hindu households would read and study on a daily basis. Yet all of these scriptures are kind of founded in the Vedas. One thing I wanted to mention here is that, I guess, growing up and explaining to people that there's so many different Hindu scriptures, there's not just one book that kind of has everything of the religion. People would ask me, isn't that confusing? And I guess it could be confusing if you're coming from a background that has one book, but I always found this as a really beautiful thing in Hinduism, where diversity is valued, and this is really represented in all of these texts. A lot of different backgrounds and views are accommodated through these various texts. The script pictured here in this picture is called Devanagari. So this is a script of ancient India, and it's in the language of Sanskrit. So most of the texts, like the Vedas and Upanishads, are given in Sanskrit. However, a lot of the other auxiliary texts, like the Smriti texts, are also in regional languages. This, I guess, script or manuscript pictured here is just one example of the many that exist. And I just wanted to touch on the fact that there are several institutions in India and worldwide today that collect, maintain, and study these ancient texts. So I actually learned how to read Devanagari and learn basic Sanskrit from one of these institutions. And I think this study of scripture from that basic language and the authentic language is a really valuable thing that we have in Hinduism. So tying these scriptures back to, again, this concept of God or Brahman. The deepest spiritual truth gleaned through the Vedas, or the fundamental texts, is that Brahman of supreme consciousness, this is used interchangeably with divine or absolute or God, pervades the entire universe. This divine reality is present in all living beings and characterized as eternal and full of bliss. There's also other descriptions and characterizations. But again, just reiterating the point here that this divine is present and permeates the entire universe and is in every single individual of all backgrounds, of no matter what gender you are, male, female, lower rungs of society, as well as the higher rungs of society. Every single individual is an extension of this Brahman. I wanted to touch on this because I think karma, or karma as it's also known, is a kind of a hit term in our society today. As my high school teacher used to say, the law of karma is what goes around and comes around. And I just want to point out, it's a little bit more complex than this. The law of karma captures what Hindus consider the basic rule or functionality of the universe. Karma is a Sanskrit term that means action. And this entire law of karma basically just states that every action we undertake has consequences. So that seems pretty intuitive. These consequences, whether positive or negative, are things that we must then face. So our present actions determine our future environment, and the result of our past actions play out in the present as our current environment. I want to point out that this is not fatalism. There is full accountability for our actions in the present moment. So there is free will, there is intentional thinking in every action that we undertake in the present. The law of karma does not state that everything is predetermined and like your present moment that you're living out is determined by your past. There is an aspect of accountability and choice in the present moment. So let's see. An aspect of karma is the birth of, or the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. So karma, while it is the unshakable link between action and consequence that extends in this lifetime, it also extends into multiple lifetimes. Humans go through this cycle of birth, death, and rebirth until liberation. So that kind of leads us into our next slide, the 4 goals of Hinduism. So these are dharma, artha, kama, and moksha. Moksha is the liberation aspect that I'll touch on again. But just to kind of quickly cover the others, artha is the pursuit of material wealth or money. It's acknowledged as a necessity in Hinduism in order to sustain ourselves, our families, and contribute to the support of our larger communities and societies. Wealth is needed. So this is acknowledged and seen as one of the goals. Kama is the enjoyment of the material world. So our scriptures do say, that we can enjoy the world through our 5 senses. Happiness from experiencing the world around us is allowed. And this is one of the aspects of life. Both of these, artha and kama, should be undertaken in the realm of also fulfilling our dharma. So doing these with righteous action in any given situation. I know dharma is sometimes described just with one short word of duty, or there's different ways to describe it. It's really a nuanced concept that is described in various scriptural texts. Gita is a really good book that covers the ins and outs of dharma. But there's 3 key values that I wanted to highlight here with dharma and following righteous action in any given situation. And those 3 are satya, or truth, brahmacharya, or self-control, and ahimsa, or non-violence. So satyam is truthfulness, being honest with ourselves and the world around us in every given situation. Brahmacharya is self-control or discipline. Discipline is one that really inspires me on a day-to-day basis. I think it's kind of a common insight that in order to grow into better people, to grow into our higher selves, we need a sense of discipline on a day-to-day basis. And then, of course, ahimsa, or nonviolence. I think this one's pretty famous worldwide, given a lot of political movements that have happened. Ahimsa stems from the acknowledgement of Brahman in everyone and everything. So we don't want to harm, given that divinity in everyone and everything. So in living in accordance with dharma, we need to balance these 3 principles of truthfulness, self-control, and non-violence. And through doing this, through living out our dharma, and after pursuing artha and kama, we can eventually reach or attain moksha, and that's liberation from the cycle of birth and death. So moksha, or liberation, is also considered in many Hindu schools to be union with the divine, and this is kind of the ultimate goal of a Hindu life. So that brings us to the purpose of human life, or in attaining moksha or liberation. There are 4 paths to do that. So there is Karma Yoga, or the path of action, performing one's duty selflessly. Jnana Yoga, or the path of knowledge, which is studying and contemplating on the scriptures. Bhakti Yoga, or the path of devotion. So that's just loving God through service is a big aspect of this. And then there's Raja Yoga, which is the path of contemplation or meditation. And that's focusing inwardly and trying to tune into the divine within. So one thing on these paths, they're not exclusive to each other. I can be both a Karma Yogi and a Bhakti Yogi in a given day with the given actions that I'm doing. And also throughout my life, I can have phases, where I might be more on the path of Karma Yoga in one phase and then switch over to a different path in a different phase of my life. But again, all of these 4 phases, and then there's multiple phases and paths outlined in Hinduism at a bigger picture, as well as the different religions of the world. All of these are seen as different paths to reaching the divine. So in reaching that divine, or Brahman, I just wanted to outline again this pluralism that exists in Hinduism. Hinduism is a faith that acknowledges the legitimacy of other faiths as well. There is one God, many forms. So Hindus believe that Brahman can take different forms. Obviously, there's a variety of deities that are followed. There's different examples: Rama, Krishna, Shiva, Devi. These are all different forms of the same one divine. And these different forms are also obviously worshipped in both male and female. So that's one aspect of Hinduism I think growing up I really appreciated. And I think as I kind of got more comfortable with my Hindu identity, the relating to the female form was something that I really appreciated. Other forms of Brahman are also there in like animals and birds. So this again stems to Hindu practice of vegetarianism, nonviolence, and respecting all forms of life. And each of these different forms has a different symbolic meaning. So Hindus and devotees will enjoy telling stories about these meanings and inspiring these values and ideals that they embody. Moving away from a little bit more of these fundamental theological concepts, I just wanted to highlight some of the practical aspects of Hinduism on a day-to-day basis. And I think these might be more relevant, especially if you have Hindu friends or neighbors, and knowing, if you walk into a Hindu home, what you might see, or if you go into a Hindu temple or place of worship, what different things you might see mean. One of these major ones in Hinduism is murti. This is inaccurately translated as idol. I think it's more of an embodiment of this Brahman or God that we pray to. So murtis can be made of wood, stone, different materials, but all of these, again, just offer the Hindu individual a way to visualize and contemplate on Brahman. On a day-to-day basis, Hindu families conduct daily worship at their home altars with murtis. And then also at temples, murtis are used during special occasions, definitely decorated and sometimes paraded around the temple. And there's different rituals that are done with murtis. So this is one really important part of Hinduism. The Om symbol is another, I think, permeating aspect of Hinduism, and interacting with Hindus, you might see this a lot. The symbol itself represents the creation of the universe. Hindus believe that chanting Om helps person align with the mind, body, and soul, align all of these to the universe again. Growing up, I guess I just heard Om in everything, right? Like it's at the beginning of the shortest mantras or names of God, and it's like embedded throughout even longer hymns and chants that take more time to experience and practice. This entire concept of Om, again, just goes back to the divine being universal. There's this kind of formless aspect of it, and it's manifested in different forms. But again, just kind of aligning with this universal acceptance concept. Hinduism, again, promotes concept of equality and non-discrimination, and I think that's really illustrated with the Om. All right, this is one that I was really excited about including in this webinar. I think it's super relevant to Hindu American society today and just American society today. For Hindus, a swastika is a symbol of auspiciousness. It's commonly used in Hindu homes, entrances, different temples, and altars of worship. It's basically just a sign for prosperity and success. The Nazis misappropriated this symbol, and I think obviously today it carries a lot of like negative baggage, but I think it's important for us to be aware that it is a Hindu symbol and it does not carry, in the Hindu context at least, any anti-Semitic connotations or any even discriminative connotations. Bindi and tilak are something that you may see when you're interacting with Hindus. Bindi is associated with the worship of God both as feminine and masculine, and then it's also indicative of the concept of the third eye of spiritual wisdom that one of the deities, Lord Shiva, is depicted as having. So traditionally they're red or maroon in color. Nowadays they come in all shapes and sizes. It can be a fashion statement. I think Selena Gomez was wearing one in some music video of hers. So it is more common in the cultural aspect, but it does have a religious meaning and symbol. One thing I wanted to quickly mention before I hand off the baton here to Ishak, Hinduism embraces science as one of the ways in which humans seek to understand the world we live in. So I know coming from kind of a more conservative background, sometimes science is seen as conflicting with religious interests, but with Hinduism and again the concept of pluralism, science is embraced. There are several schools of thought in Hinduism, and two of them actually focus on logic and scientific pursuit. So Hinduism and science kind of go hand in hand. I just wanted to end with this one again. Hinduism promotes pluralism, so not only respect for other religions, but also acknowledging the potential for truth in those religions. Hindus believe there should be no discrimination. This discrimination shouldn't happen based on a person's religion or background. Every single individual and all paths are respected as equal. And again, just underlining the core philosophy, Hinduism is a search for truth, and there's not any specific path that is better than others. So that brings me to the end of my slides. I'll go ahead and pass it off to Ishak, and I guess we'll have questions at the end.
Hello. Yeah, so my name is Ishak Patan. Just a reminder, thank you again, Padma, for everything you went over. That was really enlightening even for me. If anyone has any questions about what Padma said or about what Mir Gerwin says as we go on, feel free to type them in the Zoom webinar chat, and then we'll address them later on today when we have allocated time for that. So I am going to talk to you all about Islam, which is very exciting. So a little bit about me. I am the ING Youth Coordinator. That means that I work with younger Muslims basically in an effort to train them to be able to respond to difficult questions about Islam and Muslims and give short presentations in their own schools. So it's really exciting. We have speakers in the Bay Area, but we're also working on speakers in Michigan, in Philadelphia, New Jersey, and soon in Massachusetts. So it's a rapidly expanding program that's wonderful in terms of connecting young Muslims together and helping them overcome issues of bullying that they may be facing in their classrooms. I was born in America in Yonkers. I was raised into a Muslim family, and you know, have pretty much been a Muslim my whole life. I think one of the main catalysts for my spirituality was when I went to a Muslim city called Mecca for a small pilgrimage, which I'll talk about later. So Islam, what is Islam? Islam was founded in 7th century Arabia and in a city called Mecca, which is featured there in that picture. Islam comes from the root salam, which means peace, and it also means in Arabic submission to God. And so when you put these two together, you get peace through God's guidance. And this is kind of what a Muslim is supposed to strive for. Muslims are followers of Islam, so Islam, Muslims. And they're basically, again, as I just mentioned, people who are following God's guidance in an effort to establish peace within themselves and then establish peace amongst, in their communities and in their world. There's about 1.7 billion Muslims in the entire world, and the number is growing, which is really interesting. But contrary to what many may think, only 20% of this population are Arab. So that means that 80%, the vast majority of Muslims, are located outside of what is known as the Middle East, predominantly in areas like South Asia, but also other areas of Eastern Europe and so on. There's about 3 to 6 million Muslims in the United States, and they are kind of spread out throughout the country, but can be found in various epicenters such as like Dearborn, Michigan, Chicago, New York, just kind of in major centers. Okay, so to start off, we like to talk about what Islam teaches, and through various texts and kind of examples, Islam teaches a variety of things, including the respect for the earth and all creatures, the importance of seeking knowledge, honesty and truthfulness in what one says and does, care and compassion for those less fortunate, and striving continuously to improve oneself and the world. And as I'll kind of go on in my presentation, I hope it becomes clear that through basic Islamic rituals, one is able to, again, attain peace within himself and within the community around him or her. So there are 6 major beliefs for Muslims, and this is known in Arabic as Iman. The first is the belief in one God. So, there's this idea of this monotheistic God that is kind of in charge and ruling all of the world. There is the idea of angels. Angels are basically creatures that are meant to carry out God's commands. So an angel can be a mediary between humans and God to send messages back and forth. Also, they could be in charge of things like the weather, so God would kind of determine what would happen, and then an angel would be carrying out the aspect of thunder or something like that. Prophets and messengers are human beings who have come throughout history to teach people really 2 things. The first is to teach them about worshiping this one God, and then the second to strive to live righteous lives. So Muslims believe that there are about 124,000 prophets that came about throughout history, and this all ended with the Prophet Muhammad, who again was born in Arabia and is kind of the main prophet for Muslims. Muhammad was a honest and trustworthy person, and is really respected by all Muslims around the world, and many Muslims look to him as an example of their of how to be the best Muslim they can be. Holy scriptures are basically scriptures that have come from God throughout time, and they're basically, again, another way that God is communicating with humans. The Quran is the scripture that was revealed to Muhammad through the angel Gabriel. So you can now see the tie of all of those things. And it's believed to be, again, the word of God. Many Muslims today, read the Quran on a daily basis, and it talks about things about God, things about the world, about nature, about prophets that came before. So, there's a lot of things in the Quran about Jesus or Moses or other, typical biblical prophets, as well as, small moral guidelines for how to live a life connected to the divine. The Day of Judgment is also outlined in the Quran, and it's basically kind of a moment of time in the future, at some point, when humans are held accountable for what they did in this world that we're living in today. So, this is a moment where a just and merciful God will take into account everything that a human did, all of his or her experiences, and determine where he or she is to go into one of 2 eternal realms. One eternal realm in the afterlife is known as heaven, another is known as hell, and basically are material forms of good or material forms of bad. And then lastly, the 6th belief is God's divine will and knowledge of what happens in the world. So this is the belief that God created the world, knows what happened, before our world existed, knows what's happening now, and then knows what happens in the future. Again, similar to the kind of karma thing that Padma had spoken about, it's not necessarily deterministic in that, yes, God has full knowledge about this, but he is beyond all notions of linear time. And therefore, me as a human, I don't know what any of this plan is, and therefore I'm fully accountable for my actions going forward. The 5 pillars are known as the Islam component, and these are basically practices that Muslims will do throughout their day. So it's taking those aspects of belief and then putting them into daily practices. The first is a shahada, which is the profession of faith. And notice, so basically the shahada is to suggest, or to say, to affirm that there is no God but God, and Muhammad is his messenger. This is to confirm Muhammad as a messenger of God, but also to confirm all of the previous prophets and messengers that came before him. It's important that this is kind of an action as opposed to a belief. Muslims are meant to witness this, to affirm this idea, and really the shahada can kind of, every action or can go back to the shahada in one way or another, which is kind of how it works. Salat, this is the 5 daily prayers. So Muslims, in the picture is a prayer rug. So Muslims will use, will allocate various parts of their day towards prayer to basically think, remind themselves about God and thank God for all of the bounties that he has given them. It's really meant to interrupt one's day. So, Muslims live really busy lives, and it's important that, after lunch, for example, I would go and pray and kind of recenter myself, refocus myself, and internalize what this world and what everything is really about according to my belief system. Zakat is a required donation. So this is the idea that once a year, Muslims will take 2.5% of their annual wealth, or just not their annual, of their wealth, and give it to those in need. So they'll mainly start by giving it to those in their local community, and then if everyone in their local community is taken care of, they'll just kind of go outward and outward to find people to give this money to. What's really interesting about zakat is that people can kind of take part in it in one of 2 ways. The first is a person is either giving zakat because they have enough money, and then if one does not have enough money, then they would be getting zakat. And what is really important about it is it's, donation's kind of a soft word for it, because it's really, I guess, required donation, but it's really a responsibility, and it is a right of someone less fortunate upon the wealthy for that money. It's technically their money. It's not a wealthy person giving some of his or her money away. So there's that. And then Psalm or fasting. This is, a really common thing associated with Muslims, that there's this month for Muslims known as Ramadan, which is the month that the Quran was revealed to Muhammad, or the month it was first revealed to Muhammad. And basically, it's a time when Muslims will fast from a little bit before dawn to sundown, avoiding food, drink, and sexual intercourse in an effort to or create a sense of consciousness in their heads, an awareness of God, an awareness of themselves, and develop a sense of empathy, a really small sense of empathy for what it's like to not have food, for what it's like to be utterly dependent on the divine, and be aware of that. And the last thing is the Hajj, or the pilgrimage to Mecca. So there was a picture of Mecca before, but basically this is an idea that Muslims would go to Mecca during the month of Hajj, which is, about 2 months after Ramadan, in an effort to reenact rituals of Abraham, who is the patriarch of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. And again, what's really cool about Hajj is it's all different Muslims. So Muslims are very diverse. Again, there's 1.7 billion around the world, and they're coming from every different country. They're speaking every different language, and they're practicing all different traditions. And all of these people of all different races and backgrounds are coming together in Mecca for the sole purpose of worshiping God, which is really a fascinating sight. in getting all of these different people to come together at this one location. So the 5 pillars, basically, again, ways that Muslims will manifest their belief into action. So the point of both of these, belief and action, the end goal of Muslims is to cultivate excellent character, which is the 3rd component known as ihsan. So this is to develop a spiritual relationship with God. So again, the shahada, to affirm the divinity of God. Prayer, to thank God. Fasting, to realize one's consciousness and dependence of God. Charity, to understand that our wealth, our belongings don't belong to us, but belong to God, and they should be allocated according to how He commands. And then Hajj, to come together and come with one another to worship God. What's fascinating about this is that in the process of this spiritual relationship with God, it's inevitable to attain a strong relationship with other humans. So prayer, for example, can be done alone, but it's also generally much preferred to be done with people. So Muslims will gather with other Muslims to pray together. Oftentimes they might go to a house of worship known as a mosque and pray there. Fasting, again, about learning what it's like to developing a sense of empathy for those who don't have food. That's generally very important. Charity or alms giving, the idea of giving to others and spreading your wealth. And then Hajj, again, setting aside your differences to come together for your commonalities, which is this aspect of belief in this specific case. And this can be really manifested in the succinct phrase of the golden rule. Really, every religion belief system has a golden rule. I wish I had our slide, which has all of them for very main religions, but the Muslim version comes in the form of a hadith, which are basically quotes from Muhammad, which says, "None of you is a believer until they wish for their brother or sister what they wish for themselves." Meaning that if I were to want something for myself, I also should want it for my fellow human. And if I were to not want something for myself, I should also not wish that upon anyone else. To develop that strong sense of brotherhood, sisterhood, humanhood to come together. And then finally, I'll end with what the Quran says about diversity. So these are 2 quotes. The first is incredibly common. It's cited really everywhere because it's very succinct and kind of is a goal for people and Muslims, which is, "O humankind, we have created you from a male and a female, made you into nations and tribes, so that you get to know one another. The most noble of you in the sight of God are those who are the most conscious, and God is fully aware." You can kind of deduce this and look at a variety of aspects, but the thing I'll focus on right now is we created you from a single source in order, and then dispersed you so that you're coming from a variety of backgrounds and experiences in order for you to understand one another. That it's not meant for humans to be just one type of human, but rather we are different, and that's perfectly okay. And we should embrace those differences and learn from one another about those differences. The second is, for each of them we have established a law and a revealed way, and if God had wished, he would have made you a single nation, but the intent is to test you in what God has given you. So let your goals be everything good. Your destiny, everyone is to God, who will tell you about that in which you differed. So again, this idea that God could have made us all the same, but he didn't, and our goal should be everything good. That we should, even if we don't agree on religious beliefs or other sort of divisions that happen, we should strive to come together for those commonalities. And the Hindu tradition, the Muslim tradition, the Sikh tradition, and really many other traditions, all are, in my opinion, trying to establish a sense of harmony amongst people. And I think that's what that's what the Quran is telling Muslims to focus on. So I'm going to now pass it on to Gerwin, who can take it from here.
Thank you, and thanks for the great presentations on Hinduism and Islam. I also want to thank Kate for putting these webinars on. I think they're really useful, and I actually learned a lot. So this has been really awesome. So my name is Gerwin. I'm the executive director of an organization called the National Sikh Campaign. The purpose of the National Sikh Campaign is to help our neighbors understand who we are, because we are one of the largest religions in the world, Sikhism is, but is the least understood faith in the United States. And that leads to a whole host of issues that the Hindu community and the Muslim community are very familiar with, which is bullying, discrimination, et cetera, et cetera. So, before I get into my presentation, I actually, on my street, I'm from Cleveland, Ohio, and when I was younger, on my street, right next door to me was a Hindu and a Muslim. And we would actually, after school, play together almost every day for like years. Like we played Pokemon, we watched the Cavs games, and at that time LeBron was going to leave, so we hated LeBron together. It was really, really cool. And I think it's emblematic of kind of the relationship that the communities have had, particularly in India, because we all live in India, had lived very close to each other. So always good to spend time with Hindu and Muslim brothers and sisters. So without further ado, I'll get started on my presentation here. And I'll try to keep things pretty high level. Can you see it, Kate?
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay, great. Okay, perfect. So title is called Sikhism in America. And here, let me put it in presentation mode. There we go. So who are the Sikhs? Again, we're the least understood faith in the world. We're the 5th largest religion in the world. There are 25 million practitioners in over 500,000 in the US. That's actually larger than Judaism, which makes it the 3rd largest monotheistic faith in the world. But again, not many people know who we are, even though we've been in the United States for over 150 years. And then, as I said at the top, very few people know Sikhs, and very, very few people know who Guru Nanak is, who is the founder of the faith in the United States. So hopefully this is a good opportunity to educate some folks and inform folks on the webinar. So very quickly, the 3 pillars of Sikhism. One, we believe in one God. We believe it's important to remember God, to be humble. The second is work and earn honestly. And third is to give back to your community. Obviously, there's a lot of overlap here between the Hindu traditions and Muslim traditions, because I think, honestly, these are, particularly working hard and giving back to your community, are universal values. So I'm going to talk I'm going to spend most of my time on, the founder of the faith and what he spent most of his life preaching. So the founder of Sikhism was named Guru Nanak. He was actually born into a Hindu family. And he spent his life advocating 3 things: gender equality, religious tolerance, and class and racial equality. And he believed in these 3 values very, very strongly. And he, in fact, walked across India and even very deep into the Middle East to talk to people about the importance of treating women properly, ensuring that people aren't attacking other people because they believe different things, and obviously, attacking people because of their perceived class or their skin color. And in fact, he was born a Hindu, but when he was going on this journey, he actually brought his best friend Mardana with him, who was a Muslim. And I think that just speaks to the importance of religious tolerance in Sikhism. And it's actually often confused as a blend. It's often confused as a blend of Hinduism and Islam, but truly it's its own faith. And then, again, I'll continue to walk through the details of Guru Nanak's message. So one of the core beliefs of Sikhism was and is gender equality. At the time when the religion was being created, women were regarded as property of men, and oftentimes there was a cultural practice of either aborting young women because they weren't seen as worthy as boys, or when they're aborting them when they were born, or some very intense practices of women even having to sacrifice themselves if their husbands passed away earlier. And Guru Nanak very deeply believed that men and women were equal and should be able to participate in every sphere of life. And the faith goes as far as requesting that female followers of the Sikh faith not take the surnames of their husbands to indicate that they're independent and that women can do all the things that a man can. And the common surname for a female Sikh is Kaur, which means princess. And again, many Sikh women do not take the surnames of their husband to establish their own independence. And in the way that this has been put into practice, other than just last name, women have actually even led military battles on the behalf of the Sikh community. Women lead prayers in gurdwaras or temples, and we really regard women in an equal footing as men in the faith. And there's a favorite quote of mine that speaks to gender equality that Guru Nanak has, which was, he's basically having a conversation with other men, and he's saying, we are born of women. We are conceived in the womb of women. We are engaged and married to women. We make friendships with women, and the lineage is continued because of women. When one woman dies, we take another one. We are bound with the world through woman. Why do we call her bad? From her, kings are born. From women, women are born. Without women, there'd be no one at all. Sorry, I took this as like in a direct translation, so it didn't come on the page as precisely as it should have, but I think you get the point. He really emphasized this argument when he was on his travels that I mentioned earlier. The second piece that was really important to the founder of the faith, Guru Nanak's message, was religious tolerance. So when Guru Nanak had his divine revelation, and I actually want to kind of clarify that too. None of the Sikh gurus consider themselves as prophets or anything more than men. They all consider themselves as humans. So there's really no prophets in the Sikh faith. But that aside, when he had his moment where he had, I guess there's no better word, I guess, than revelation. The first thing he said is, there is no Hindu, there is no Muslim. And he didn't mean that literally that there's no Hindu, there's no Muslim, because there's literally a Hindu and a Muslim on this webinar. What he's saying is, what's more important than our common religious identities is our common humanity. And it was his belief that God does not worry about one person's individual faith, because God is not subscribing to an individual faith. He cares more about people's humanity than how humans have decided to divide themselves up. So religious tolerance is time and time again just highly emphasized in the Sikh faith. A couple more notes on this point before I move on. Even the holy book, which I'll talk about a little bit later, the Guru Granth Sahib, incorporates teachings from other faiths, particularly Hinduism and Islam. And it again speaks to that Sikhs really believe that we're not sole proprietors of the truth. And again, it's really emphasized throughout the faith in a multitude of ways. The third core belief that Guru Nanak had was class and racial equality. So at the time of India, culturally, there was a very brutal system that divided people into different classes. He fundamentally believed that all people were equal, and that, you know, your lineage should not determine your destiny. And to, you know, promote this idea that all men are created equal, he created an institution called Langar, which is in every Sikh Gurdwara, Sikh temple. And this concept is, no matter who you are, you can sit down together, no matter what class, race, or gender you are, everyone can sit together and have a meal. Now, that doesn't seem that revolutionary today because it happens literally all the time. But at a time when, you know, people from different classes would not even speak to each other or eat with each other, it was quite revolutionary to have a regular system that required people, all different backgrounds, to sit, eat, and talk to each other, again, on a regular basis. So this, I mean, this institution lives on. If you go to the holiest temple, or the most revered temple in Sikhism, Harmandir Sahib, the Golden Temple in Amritsar, India, there are 4 doors, meaning anyone can come in, north, south, east, west, anyone from any corner of the world. And it continues this practice of Langar, feeding almost 100,000 people a day, regardless of their background or their religion or what have you. So again, this was a critical belief of Guru Nanak. And then the final guru, the 10th guru, Guru Gobind Singh Ji, he really codified these ideas, and through an organization, or an institution rather, called the Khalsa. And that's when Sikhs started wearing turbans. And we often wore turbans to signify our commitment to uphold the 3 values that I just spoke about earlier. Because at the time, the only people that could wear turbans were the highest class people. A low-class person could never wear a turban. But because we believe that your class should, and your birth should not predetermine your life or your potential, he wanted all people to look like kings, so that the only thing that would matter is who you are and not where you came from. And again, I talked about the last name for females. For males, to kind of undercut this this cultural system that was created, he gave every last name for males as Singh, which is the highest last name, one of the highest last names someone could have, and Singh means lion. So Sikhs not only got to wear a turban to signify their sovereignty and to showcase their commitment to the values of gender equality, religious tolerance, and racial and class equality, but it kind of codified a lot of those values. And then after Guru Gobind Singh Ji, who was our final guru, the current guru who we consider the full teacher of Sikhism, is we consider to be our holy book, the Guru Granth Sahib. You can see a picture of it right there. And again, it incorporates knowledge from a whole host of different faiths, and that includes Hinduism and Islam. And just for fun, just some notable Sikhs in the United States, because again, not many people know who we are, so I want to showcase their contributions. The first Asian American congressman, Dalip Singh Song, here he is with Lyndon Johnson and John F. Kennedy. He's in the middle, you can't tell. The inventor of fiber optics, that's kind of a big deal. Otherwise, this webinar would not be possible, Narinder Kafani. So thank you, Narinder, for making this webinar possible. YouTube personality, Lily Singh. She's gotten pretty big over the years. The CEO of MasterCard, AJ Bunga. So if you have any issues with your credit card, I have his personal email. I can lend it out to you. Maybe you can do something. Probably not. And the Defense Minister of Canada, Harjit Sajjan. So that is it. There's a lot more I could have covered, but this is really just kind of a 101 thing. And I'm happy to answer any questions that people may have.
Thank you so much, Gerwin, and thank you, Padma and Ishaq as well. I think that the overviews of your faith traditions were really helpful, and I certainly learned a lot about each of the faith traditions talked about today. And we're running out of time for Q&A, but I would like to end on one question. I'd like to ask our panelists to talk about why this webinar is important and why they think that talking about these faith traditions is really essential. So if I could pass the baton on to one of our panelists to answer this question. I know it's a challenging one.
What was the question again? Sorry, I was like undoing my share.
So the question is why being a part of this webinar is important, and why talking about these faith traditions is important, and why we should continue having this dialogue.
Yep. So I mean, I'm speaking personally. I mean, I think it's important. Well, one, because I learned stuff today, which I thought was great. But two, as an American, I think it's important because we do live in a multicultural society, and we're all bringing our perspectives to the table. And a lot of people's kind of baseline views of the world, whether they're super religious or even not that religious, is in some way informed by their faith that they're born into. And I think it helps people understand where they're coming from and what their values are. And certainly watching Padma's presentation and the presentation on Islam, you can see there's a lot of commonalities and values between people. And I think, again, the country is very divided, and as an American, I think just having these conversations is really important. Because it does, in many cases, it does reveal people's common humanity.
And just to add to what Gerwin mentioned, I think one thing that is really important with our society that we live in today and these specific faith traditions is that a lot of times the media does carry so many misrepresentations and stereotypes. And when these are perpetuated, not good things happen. So it's really important not only to get the overall bigger picture of what's actually represented by these faiths, but also to hear, I think, the personal stories of people who practice them and understand, like Erwin was saying, the commonalities between all of us that is represented.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree with that. I mean, I think our three communities, as you said at the top, Kate, really do face a lot of bigotry and ignorance. But oftentimes that bigotry and ignorance is compounded by our own silence. So I think having these types of webinars and having these types of discussions really helps mitigate some of the issues.
Yeah, to add to that, I think it's just generally really important for people to understand the similarities between our traditions, but also how similar, various concepts in our traditions are to other traditions like Christianity and Judaism, Buddhism, like things like that. And, kind of seeing the strong level that nearly all major religions in the world like boil down to a few shared concepts that, again, as I mentioned before, I think are just trying to create a sense of harmony between themselves and their communities.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much. If anybody watching this webinar does have other questions that they want answered, feel free to email them to me, reach out to me. I will ask our panelists, and I will be sending out a recording of this webinar to you all shortly once it is uploaded. And we will have another webinar on interfaith in Ramadan, May 10th, so talking about how Muslims can engage other faith traditions during the month of Ramadan, but also how other faith traditions can learn more about Islam during this time period. So thank you so much for our panelists for being here. I thought it was a really wonderful webinar, and I thought it was really educational. I learned a lot about these traditions. and I will see you on the next webinar.
All right. Thank you, Kate, and thank you for everyone participating.
Thank you.
Likewise, thank you.
Bye, everyone.